Greetings from the bowels of the Hinckley campus. I just wanted to update you folks and have a brief conversation with you, even though it'll be pretty one-sided, about what we're doing and where we've been so far in the class. And so right now you're working on a technical review, and I think I've said this, but I want to reiterate it. The reason I'm having you write a technical review isn't necessarily because I think that you're ever going to have to necessarily write a product review in the workplace, although it is certainly possible. The reason that I'm having you write in this particular format is because I think there are a lot of lessons baked into it that are relevant no matter what field you're going into. So the reality of teaching technical writing at the community college is that I cannot possibly assign all of the types of writing that you're going to be confronted with in your various workplaces, just because of the diversity of careers that we're confronted with here. So what I have to do is pick and choose and try to find the common denominators across your various careers. And one of the things that we know is that a very common type of writing that happens within the workplace is writing to assess. And so whether we're evaluating a piece of property, or we're evaluating a new piece of equipment or a tool, or sometimes we're evaluating a person, an employee, or a client, or whatever. Oftentimes we have to assess something, and so that's why we're doing the product review. And I also, part of the reason why I chose a product review as opposed to, some other type of assessment was that it's probably a pretty familiar piece of writing for you, in that we engage with them all the time, so we can leverage sort of what we know about this type of writing. And so I think it's really important for us to remember that in a review, we're not trying to sell the product. In the same way that if I were doing a personnel review of a employee, my job isn't to just, speak in unicorns and rainbows. My job is to provide an honest, objective assessment of that particular person. And so I want you to keep that in mind, because in reading a lot of people's reflections on the sample review about Beats headphones, a lot of people said, geez, he did a really nice job selling the product. And that may be true. He did have fundamentally a pretty positive review of the product, but that's not our job here. Our job here is to take a look at a product with which we have a significant amount of experience, and our job is to lay out a set of clear criteria by which we want to evaluate that product, and then we want to provide an honest, evidence-based assessment of how well that product works across those criteria. And so I want to emphasize a couple of things that I think are really important. One of which is the criteria. You have to pick criteria that are super relevant to your audience. So I'll give the example of a lawnmower. If I'm writing the review of a lawnmower, there are almost infinite criteria that I could use to evaluate a lawnmower. I could talk about the availability of color. I could talk about what the engine sounds like, and I can evaluate that. But we know that for the average consumer, there are certain things that we care about when it comes to a lawnmower. We want something that's probably reliable, easy to start, light, easy to maintain. And so those are the types of criteria we should pay attention to. And so when you're crafting your review, I want you to really think carefully about the criteria that you use. And so that's step one. Whenever we're evaluating something in a technical capacity, we have to think about the criteria that are going to matter most to our audience. And sometimes those are very specific criteria. You can imagine that if you're evaluating a piece of equipment, let's say a welder, I know I have a lot of welders here, or a CNC machine, something I know very little about, you can probably, when it comes down to it, the distinction between high-end industrial or commercial grade welders and CNC machines is probably pretty minute, and so you really do have to kind of drill in and look very closely at very specific criteria. But in this case, when you're talking about a consumer grade product, which many of you are, we don't have to be nearly as specific, and we want to think about the ones that really tend to move the needle with the reader. And so choosing the criteria is not an insignificant part of the process. Once we choose those criteria, which ultimately work as sort of the backbone of our review, then we're going to practice something that's super important, and that is the ability to support claims with evidence. And so fundamentally, when you assess something across a series of criteria, each of the evaluations you make, micro evaluations of each criteria, let's say that I'm evaluating the power of a lawnmower, I have to find meaningful ways to describe my experience with that lawnmower and assess it in terms of its power. And fundamentally, there are three ways that I know of that you can do that. One is to point to product descriptions or specifications. So you could make reference to the size of the engine, the type of the blade, the torque, the specifications. Generally speaking, those only get us so far. Those are features, and we really want to focus on benefits. The other way that we can support our claim would be to talk about personal experience. So if in addition to telling you that it had a 6.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine with a mulching blade, I was able to tell you that I went away on vacation, came back to 7 inches of lush wet grass, and I tore right through it and mulched it up beautifully, and the cleanup was minimal. Then you probably have a pretty good sense of what that 6.5 horsepower motor is capable of. And then the third way that we can really provide a useful assessment in the context of an evaluation is to compare it to other things. Sometimes that's to compare it to competitors or to compare it to some benchmark. And so, we're going to use a skill that we talked about in our cover letter. Fundamentally, we're going to try to show, not tell. You're not going to tell me it's the greatest set of headphones you've ever used. You're going to show me why it's the greatest set of headphones you've ever used. You're not going to tell me it's the most durable lawnmower you've ever had. You're going to show me. You're probably going to have to provide some physical description. You're probably going to have to talk about some technology, proprietary technology, or specifications, which may require you to use some definitions. And you're certainly probably going to want to talk about your personal experience and maybe compare it to other things with which you've had experience. And so that's fundamentally important to me. So those are two really important things. Don't take your criteria for granted. Those need to be carefully selected based on the use profile of your reader. And two, make sure that you're supporting those claims with diverse evidence. So I think we can imagine that if you just relied on your personal experience, that may leave something to be desired in terms of credibility. But on the flip side, if we just talk about it sort of through the lens of description or specifications, that also kind of removes the human element and removes your experience with it. You can imagine if the writer of the Beats headphones review had just talked about it from an acoustical engineering or an electrical engineering perspective, it probably would have been pretty hard for you to understand the significance of things. Like the noise cancellation technology and the DSP and the Bluetooth and the different materials. So it's pretty important for us to be able to illustrate those things with personal experience. So I want you to keep that in mind. And then ultimately, one of the things that we've been talking about is the idea of the one friggin' thing. And what that means to me is that somebody can, read the review and understand an overarching assessment. And you guys did a really nice job overall of picking that out in the Beats headphone review, which was that basically these are great headphones, but they're very expensive. And so we think of that kind of like the thesis. And so that's what we're doing here is we're just trying to get used to evaluating something. And I think that's a fundamentally important skill because as experts, you're going to have to leverage your expertise to make decisions. And so it's pretty common that those types of decisions, when you're thinking about capital improvement within a business, or relocating or those types of things. Generally speaking, you have to document those assessments in writing, and the more clearly you can do it, the more convincingly you can do it, and sort of the more in touch with your reader you can do it, the better off you're going to be. So I want you to remember that your job here is to provide an objective, evidence-based assessment of something. That's our fundamental goal here. And so what we're really going to be paying attention to is, do you have a good superstructure? Do you have a good layout? Are you using those criteria effectively to organize your information? Are you supporting your claims about this product with clear and compelling evidence that sort of works on multiple levels? Are you saying one friggin' thing? That's super important also. And so that's sort of what we're up against. And ultimately, this project is going to help us because as we move forward, your last project in the semester is to write a recommendation report. And fundamentally what the recommendation report is it's a series of evaluations. So you're going to be given a set of scenarios, and you're going to have to make a recommendation for what the best solution to a problem is. And I'll give you an example. It might sound something like this. You're the IT person for a school department in Maine. Let's call it RSU 207. You've won a grant to buy new tablets for your 7th and 8th grade students, and the superintendent has come to you and says, I would like to have a report on my desk that shows me 3 good options for tablets and recommends which one you think is the best for our use in our audience. And so you're going to have to make a series of assessments and ultimately make a compelling recommendation. So that's sort of our capstone project, and you'll see that that project is going to require you to sort of use all the skills that we've been talking about so far this semester. So looking down the chute here, I'm going to be giving you feedback in the next day or so on your reviews. I want you to, take this into account, and I want you to be able to make substantive revisions. When we talk about revision in this class, it's not just, hey, I'm going to go through and fix what Mike said to fix, because that's not really revising. That's just, listening to my feedback. Revising, if you look at the word revision, it literally means revision, to re-see something. And so I always want you to kind of fall back on what's my purpose, who's my audience, and what type of writing am I doing. Those are the three most important questions. Those sort of make up your communicative or rhetorical situation, and I want you to always sort of be looking at your writing through that lens. So your purpose here is not to sell the product. Your purpose here is to provide an objective assessment of something against a set of criteria. Your audience for this is people who are not experts, people who are fairly new to this domain of knowledge, and therefore you're going to have to calibrate your language appropriately. Now, if we were writing a review of a CNC machine or a welder, and you were doing it for a fellow technician or expert, then we would be able to format that review and write that review in a very different way. But in this case, I'm asking you to write to sort of the lowest common denominator. And then I always want you to ask yourself, well, what should a review look like? And really, there are no necessarily, when it comes to a review, there's kind of a wide range. And so you can use any formatting that you want. You can incorporate any elements that you'd like. What's most important to me is that you're putting the reader's needs first, and that you're making sure that you're sort of answering their questions before they have a chance to ask them, which is in some ways my definition of a good piece of writing. When you can anticipate and answer reader questions, that usually puts us in a good situation, and the reader's generally going to feel pretty satisfied. So that's sort of my mini lecture for today. I just wanted to give you, reiterate sort of why we're doing this assignment. It's not because I think that in the workplace you're going to have to routinely write product reviews. It's because I think you're going to routinely have to evaluate things and assess things. Sometimes it's actually a procedure or a process. How well is this working? And it's the same sort of methodology holds true. You're going to have to look at it against a set of criteria. You're going to have to make a series of assessments of those individual criteria, but you're going to have to support those assessments using data, evidence, experience, comparisons, and that's really where the meaning is going to be generated in those reviews. So that's what we're up against. I'm going to have another mini lecture at the end of this week, which gets us thinking about our next assignment, believe it or not, which is the instructions assignment. And I'll just give you the sort of 50,000-foot flyover of that assignment. That's going to ask us to do a whole new set of writing. Instead of assessing and instead of trying to sell ourselves in a resume and cover letter, the instruction is all about guiding somebody in the most user-friendly way through a procedure. And so, you should be thinking of some procedure that you might want to write about. But until next time, as always, shoot me any questions that you have. My phone number's on the syllabus. You have my email address. I'm happy to help. And I look forward to reading those reviews, giving you feedback. But I look even more forward to seeing what you're able to do in revision, because one of the things that we know as a pretty stone-cold fact about writing is that the best writers are generally just the best revisers. It's very seldom that we're able to get a piece of writing into a really good situation or into a good place on the first draft. Generally speaking, writers have to put their writing through multiple drafts, and I hope that you're seeing that in this class. I'm trying to create a series of feedback loops. Most of the time it looks like this. You draft it, you get some feedback from a peer, you give it to me, I give you some feedback, you revise it, I give you more feedback, you give it back to me. And that's important because even professional writers, the folks who do this for a living in a variety of capacities, have to have those feedback loops, because we think of writing as a solitary process, a single person sitting at a computer, but what we know is that it's a much more interactive process and that it's very collaborative. And the one thing that you really can't be as a writer is your own audience, unless you're writing a journal. So you have to engage people in that process. So what I'm looking for at this point in the semester is that you're able to make substantive revisions, that you're not just editing, that you're not just going in and changing really small things, but that when you're out of alignment in terms of genre, purpose, and audience, that you're addressing those things first. Those are the most important things, and I think that this assignment requires you to really think carefully about those three things. So thanks again. Take care.